before you do, Genevieve, do we need to do anything?
Yeah, I'm starting the live stream right now. So just so everybody knows, this is a public meeting. We're streaming it on the Port's YouTube channel to enable attendance virtually by the public. So everything you say is live on YouTube right now, will be preserved as a recording. And you're good to go.
Great, thank you, Jen.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Bi-State Working Group. Today we're here to discuss the public-private partnership panel discussion and work session. Thank you everyone for attending.
Great. Betty has the, you've been working on this project probably longer than anybody else in attendance. You actually were part of the feasibility studies for bridge replacement back in the late 90s, weren't you? Oh, you're on mute. Betty, I think you're on mute there.
Sorry about that. I didn't get on until 2004 on the council level, and not mayor until 2010. So I believe that probably still one of the longest, but I remember doing this same meeting 3 years ago.
Right. Yes. Well, thank you for your service. And I will go ahead and take it from there and just give a little bit of background on the purpose for tonight's work session. Really, for several years, there's been a lot of interest in public-private partnerships, going back to over 4 years ago when United Bridge Partners originally submitted a proposal. And so there's just been a lot of interest regarding that. Lowell Clary has met with the Bi-State Working Group last month, gave a preview presentation on public-private partnerships. And based upon the direction from the Bi-State Working Group, this panel discussion was brought together to really increase the public's awareness of public-private partnerships and just become more educated and informed about the processes related to this project delivery method. As mentioned earlier, this work session is being broadcast live on our YouTube channel, and it will also be archived there as well. So you can come back and reference it at your convenience. And then just a reminder, if you're not speaking, to put yourself on mute so that we can hear the presenters and the facilitator. So with that, I do think it for our presenters, I think I will just run through who is in attendance just for their sake. And so just for everyone's sake, I'll go ahead and make the introductions just for ease, but we do have Mayor Barnes from the city of Bingen. She welcomed us at the beginning. President John Everett from the Port of Hood River. Mayor Marla Keithler from the city of White Salmon. Mayor Kate McBride from the city of Hood River. Bob Benton, Commissioner, Hood River County. Jacob Anderson, Commissioner, Klickitat County. And those are the 6 Bi-State Working Group members. And we also have Christy Chapman, Commissioner, Port of Hood River, who serves as an alternate to the Bi-State Working Group. As I go through the list of participants, I see we have Lee Whitney, who is another representative from United Bridge Partners. We have Chuck Green, who is a port, our NEPA advisor, helping us with contracting, AE design, and NEPA issues. Fred Cowell is the Port of Hood River's CFO. We have, let's see, just going down the list. Steve Siegel is the Bi-State Working Group consultant who is helping us with governance issues. And I believe, I'm going to leave the actual speakers to you, Lowell, but I think that is everybody aside from the speakers. So with that, I will hand the baton off to Lowell Clary, who is our P3 consultant. And Lowell, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Kevin, and good afternoon, everyone. You have gotten the bios from all the speakers, so I'm not going to read them to you. But what I'm going to do is take a few minutes and just talk briefly about them. I will talk about Nick Farber when he comes on before his presentation. I've known Jen Meyer for many years. She was an innovative finance and project delivery expert with the Federal Highway Administration for a number of years. She initiated what's called the P3 subcommittee with the Transportation Research Board. She's been an advisor with Ernst & Young advising public owners in P3 transactions, and she now lives in Seattle and works in the Seattle area. So our next speakers will be Ryan Dolan and Ken with United Bridge Partners. Ken is a professional engineer, previously worked with Colorado DOT, and he is going to focus on the engineering and technical aspects, whereas Ryan's background is more financial, and he was an advisor also with E&Y previously before he went with United Bridge Partners. And Sia Kusha will be our final speaker. Sia's with Plenary Group. He's a professional engineer as well, and he will also talk technical as well as project delivery approaches. And Sia has also been with a large engineering firm in his background over many years. We're very fortunate to have these speakers with us because they know public-private partnerships inside and out, and I think they will give you a very good feel for that today. Just to give you an idea of where we're headed, each speaker will have about 10 to 15 minutes presentation. We'll have a few minutes for specific questions for each speaker, about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll go to the next speaker, and after all speakers have finished their time, we'll have about an hour for roundtable. Where the bi-state working group can ask your questions in more detail and we can explore the issues in more detail. So with that, Jen, I'll turn it over to you and Kevin to begin the first presentation.
And Jen, before I forget, I did forget a very important person, my boss, Michael McElwee, the executive director of the Port of Hood River, is also online, as is Genevieve Scholl, who really has helped put this whole Zoom meeting together. So welcome them as well. So let me go ahead and share the screen and we can bring up Jen Meyer's presentation. Jen, feel free to give me cues to move the presentation forward.
Absolutely. Let's stay on the title slide for a moment. I'm leading off this very distinguished panel, and I have a particular goal in mind. I want to give you all the big picture because I know that many of you are leaders of this organization and leaders in your community. And if you go forward with a P3, you're going to be called upon to explain what you're doing and why. And most folks won't have the time or patience to sit down for a 3-hour workshop, as you all are about to do. So my personal goal is that at the end of this workshop, you'll be able to give sort of the elevator pitch version of why you might think about doing a P3 and why we're moving it forward if you are. Let me also start by saying I'm not a P3 cheerleader. As Lowell mentioned, I worked for the Federal Highway Administration for 17 years, helping state and local governments come up with ways to finance projects, everything from critter crossings in Montana to I-25 in Denver. And I've always had a skeptical eye about P3s. I remember when we first had P3 advocates presenting about them in California, and one of them waxed very, very positively about, oh, it's just like how they built the railroads. And I was thinking that might not be the way to pitch it in the land of the robber barons. But since then, I've come to believe that well-structured, well-managed, and well-advised P3s can have great benefits for the public sector. But you have to get into them for the right reasons, go about them the right way, and the third part, and we can't highlight this enough, communicate relentlessly to the public about what you're doing and why. So I hope this workshop will prepare everyone for doing that. Let's advance to the next slide. So I want to cover 4 things in the big picture. What are the goals for undertaking a P3? Why do P3s largely fail? And there's a lot of reasons why P3 can fail, but I want to highlight a few of the ones that have tripped up a lot of them. What point should you undertake a P3? At what stage in the project life cycle? And should the federal government be involved? Those are the 4 highlights I want to hit. Next slide. If P3 is the answer, and next slide, what's the question? What problems does P3 solve? Now, when we look at our system in the United States, we already have a form of public-private partnership. It's very likely that if you pursue a conventional procurement method for this project, you're going to wind up having a private sector firm design the project and then have a public sector firm build it to the specifications. So either way, the public sector is going to be providing the funding for this bridge to the private sector. If you do it in a conventional way, it'll be at the lowest bid. What the P3 model will change is what the timing and terms are for how the private sector will get that money. So I think it's important when folks say, why are you bringing the private sector into this? Or if there's any kind of resistance of that form, you can say, well, in our system, we already have a lot of private involvement. A P3 structure just changes the terms on which that happens. Next slide. But why would you want to do that? Well, when P3s first came on the horizon in the United States, a lot of folks pitched them as sources of money. They said, here we have billions and trillions in private capital, and here we have billions and trillions in needs, and we put them together, it'll be like peanut butter and chocolate, and everything will work out. That's not the reason why you undertake a P3. I used to like to say at Federal Highways, you come for the financing, you stay for the performance. They don't make money for you. What you hope to achieve is greater value and greater assurance on cost, schedule, and a lot of other aspects of the project. So please don't pitch it to anybody as making money or a source of revenue. And that's especially important when there are tolls involved, because a lot of the projects, which we'll talk about in a moment, that have failed have really conflated the decision to undertake a P3 and the decision to do a project and how to pay for it. And those are really separate decisions that have to be separately communicated. Are P3s about cutting labor costs or undercutting labor? No, they shouldn't be. That shouldn't be the source of the cost savings. There's some pretty highly paid people who work on P3s, and that's not the goal of a P3 to do that. I've also heard folks pitch P3s in kind of a negative way to say, well, government can't handle things and they're very inefficient. And I want to push back on that, because I do think it's optimizing roles. The government has to change in order to undertake a P3. One of the most challenging things for organizations in the state and local governments we've supported at Federal Highways is changing their standards and saying, all right, instead of saying, we want you to use this quantity of steel, or we want this thing, what's our real goal? To get this bridge to go from A to B and to not harm salmon and all the other things that are really performance-based standards. And to do that, the government agencies that are on the owner side of a P3 also need to evolve and really be innovation seeking and performance seeking. So it's really not about an inefficient government or incapable government. It's changing on the government side for more effectiveness as well. And finally, some folks have characterized P3s as, oh, it's great, you take the politics out of it by bringing a public-private partner in who doesn't have the politics. And that's not really a role we want private partners to have. The private partner can't resolve a political dispute, can't resolve, environmental or archaeological or project-related disputes. Bringing in a P3 into that is only going to make it worse. So really defining roles is part of what a good P3 does, and solving political disputes is not the role of the P3 or the partner. Next slide. So I've given you all the wrong reasons. Let me give you the right reasons. You undertake a P3 when you believe that the private sector company can manage risks better than the public sector. You're looking for the best value for the investment. And what kinds of risks a private sector partner might be able to manage better under this model? Obviously, if they design the project, they're going to be better to building those specifications. You won't have those change orders that roll through. You may not have the schedule delays that you see because you have a performance-based payment. You have the ability to capture, if your agency hasn't built bridges in many years, and you have the option to take on a partner who's built many bridges in different countries, they're going to have the relationships with suppliers, they're going to have the relationships with designers, they're going to know all the lessons learned. It's sort of the difference. If I wanted to, I know some folks build their own houses. I would never do that. I take on somebody who's built houses before and knows how to do it and knows how to obtain the materials. Obviously, this is a larger scale, but that's the idea, is bringing on the premium quality that you can get from a private partner and changing the payment mechanism, both for performance and also because you want to get that best value. Alan Shepard used to say the bravest thing he ever did was go to the moon in a vehicle designed by the lowest bidder. If you want to get the best value, often you want to create a relationship with your private partner that provides payment for performance and that doesn't necessarily exclusively look at low bid. That doesn't mean you're not cost conscious. It does mean that you may not want to do the same model as for a project that everyone understands how to build, that there's not a lot of technological or design risk and other risks involved. Next slide. One of the ironic things about the way that we do projects now in the United States is that after a large project is built, typically we don't get a long-term warranty. In fact, the warranty on the car you're driving in is likely to be longer than the warranty on the bridge it's driving over. And that doesn't seem to make sense if you're spending $20,000 to $40,000 on a car, depending on how rich your tastes are, and you're spending a couple $100 million on a bridge. Why can't you get a long-term warranty? Most large projects are built by large construction consortiums, and after construction, after acceptance, there's typically not the ability to provide the financial promise that involves a long-term warranty. So one of the advantages of structuring something as a P3, I said folks are interested in the financial aspect, but it also serves as an implicit warranty. If there's a problem with the project and you do it conventionally, then you may be able to sue the constructor or sue the designer, but then you're in the courts and they have your money. If you're in a P3 situation and there's a failure of performance, then you have the ability to stop payments until the situation was resolved. So in some cases, that puts the power in the hands of the public sector if you have a well-structured, well-written P3 arrangement. Next slide. But it's not all roses. I've shown some of the positive aspects of the P3 and some of the goals you want, but there have been some notable failures. And I wanted to characterize a few of the things that have gone into the failed P3s that I've seen. A picture on the screen is of the Chicago Skyway, which some of you may be familiar with. It's not really a completely relevant example to this project because it was an existing bridge that was very low tolls, and it was taken over by the private sector as an asset monetization, or basically sold to the private sector. And it was done without limitations on the tolling. So a lot of folks felt very, very angry about this later because the city of Chicago did receive a lot of money for the project, but the toll payers wound up paying much higher tolls and perceiving it as part of the private profits. And also there's a lot of challenges related to toll risk. I could go on about other reasons why that project might not have been optimal, but the lesson that we took from it at Federal Highways and the lesson overseas when we've had projects that have not gone well, we haven't given up on the P3 model, but it has taught us lessons for how to design better projects in the future. And having better advisors on the public side that can really match the quality of the advisors on the private side is part of that. Next slide. Another project that has been considered a failure, and when I talk about failure and success, I want to be careful because it's kind of a relative term. If you have this project, which is the South Bay Expressway in southern San Diego, it was almost considered a project. The public sector didn't have enough funding to complete. It was one of the last undeveloped areas of San Diego County. A private partner took it on, and before the environmental work was done, and there were some endangered species discovered on the property, so there was a lot of delays for environmental work and litigation. There were a lot of other issues with the toll projections. It opened right as it had a sort of perfect storm of toll risk and everything else. But if you look at it at the end of the day, from the public perspective, you could consider it a success in some sense that a road got built without California state taxpayer dollars in it. But the reality is that because there were failures on the private side, if you think of success having 1,000 fathers and failures being an orphan, in the P3 world, it really works the other way. If it's not successful for both partners, the failure is felt by everyone. So in this case, there are a lot of lessons learned about at what point to bring on a private partner. And again, conflating the decision for tolling and at what rate with the decision to undertake a P3. So I know that the bridge we're talking about in this case has already been a toll bridge for years, so not like you're coinciding those two decisions, but it's something to really think about as it's communicated to the public. Next slide. When to undertake a P3? And some people ask, when's the right time in a project life cycle to undertake a P3? Well, as we see in the South Bay Expressway example, if you're doing generally, I recommend completing the federal environmental work because states are really, and local government agencies are really more comfortable with that process, more able to handle any unexpected wildcards that come up. But I think in Washington State, the progressive P3 model does give you some advantages on both the public and the private side. It's good to have most of the known risks exposed and known. The lower the unknown risks are, the lower your pricing will be. So it can be beneficial to get the private sector involved at an early stage of the process, because the more they understand about the risks, the better they'll be able to approach the project and the pricing, and the better they'll be able to convince the other partners that they have in the project, their finance partners and other partners, to support the project at the lowest possible cost. The important thing about the timing is that if you do have early private sector involvement, it needs to come with enough exit ramps and off ramps so that you can end the project and end the process and not proceed with something that you've discovered is no longer cost effective. Again, the key is really having the right analysis of benefits, what the so-called value for money analysis that really documents this is how it would look as a private project. This is how it would look as a public project. Let's look at them side by side over the life cycle of a project, and really think about the value we're creating for our community. That's essential. And it's probably a practice we should undertake on every project and every public project. If we looked at a lot of them over 25 years, we might make different choices for materials. We might make different choices for how we undertook them. But having that model in the P3 has been one of the biggest and unexpected benefits of really looking at this for multiple projects, is the ability to take a long-term view and really look at the optimal way to deliver a project. All right, next slide. And some have questioned, can the federal government be involved? If it's a public-private partnership. We used to have very restrictive policies. When I joined Federal Highways, we had just started to look at the possibility of changing them. And a lot of things have happened throughout different administrations. It turns out in the United States, and some folks wonder, why have they been so extensively used overseas and not so much here? Well, in the United States, we subsidize financing of publicly sponsored conventional projects with municipal bonds. So from the get-go, it's cheaper to do a project that doesn't have private involvement, because private involvement triggers a lot of things that make you ineligible for using those public bonds. So that's part of the reason why the Federal Highway Administration and US DOT created financing programs like the Transportation Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act and private activity bonds. Now, they do bring on federal requirements, but you'll find that your private partners are typically interested in obtaining these because they provide important flexibilities that are not available to large infrastructure projects on the private market. And there's a lot of flexibility in how those requirements are implemented on projects that have private involvement. And I want to note also that federal support for P3s has really been bipartisan. The program I worked on started under the Clinton administration. It continued under the Bush administration. It continued under Obama. It's really been something that both parties have embraced, and with slightly different flavors and priorities and how they wanted to implement it, but it has continued, and it is a very cost-effective way for the federal government to provide support to infrastructure. TIFIA can really be done. Essentially, it's works, and I know we're going to have a lot of folks that can speak in much greater detail about how it functions, but it's essentially the federal government offering its cost of capital to the states and to the private partners, and passing it on at a very low fee. So it's a very effective program, and I expect it to be available into the future for projects like these. I think there's a lot more I could say about all of these topics, but I wanted to begin this panel again. The folks here can give you a lot of detail and a lot of overview about how the projects actually work. But, and if you do proceed down the P3 path, 100-page documents are going to be in your future with lots of details. And that's another reason why I recommend having really good advisors who are very familiar with each of the provisions in those hundreds of pages of documents. But again, I hope at the end of this panel, you'll be able to give also the 30-second elevator pitch of this is what we're thinking of doing and this is why, so that you can show how you're carrying out the public interest possibly through this model. Thanks very much. And let's turn, I don't know if we're going to have questions at the very end of the panel or do them after each speaker.
We're going to do both, Jen. So we'll have about 5 to 7 minutes for some quick questions. If anyone on the panel has any specific questions about Jen's presentation you would like to bring up now, we certainly can entertain those.
Yeah, John, this is John Everett, and you said that one reason for pursuing a P3 relationship is the expertise in the building of the project. But I understood from Lowell at our last meeting that P3 companies are not builders.
That's true. I mean, it's almost like it's like a Hollywood model in some ways, where you're not the producer of the project is the P3 company, and they're going to be familiar with who to obtain in terms of as partners for constructors, for designers, for other things. There are some companies that take on both, but my understanding is that that's a typical model is that they're not going to be the ones doing it self-performing, but they're the ones that are going to be taking on the risk and the guarantee that it will happen.
Right, and Jen and John, both United Bridge Partners and Plenary will both talk about that, John.
All right.
So they'll lay out how they structure that and how they go about building their teams.
Thanks.
So other questions at this point? Okay. Kevin and Ryan and Ken, United Bridge Partners. Everyone ready?
Sure, thanks, Lowell.
Just a second while I bring up the presentation.
Sure. And can you still hear me all right?
Yep, hear you loud and clear.
While you're doing that, I want to go spend time with Christy. That looks like a really nice setup.
All right, here we go. Appreciate your patience.
And Kevin, you can just go straight to that second slide with the agenda on it. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks everyone for including us on this panel today. We're just going to give a brief overview of who we are, talk about our project case studies a little bit, and then touch on a few of the subjects that we were asked to comment on, including our typical project delivery methods, our point of view on project funding, our experience with different types of procurements, and then our point of view on tolling as well. So moving to the next slide. Again, I'm Ryan Dolan, lead business development efforts here at United Bridge Partners, and I've been with the firm for about 2 years after spending some time in consulting. Okay.
Thank you as well. My name is Kinsley. I've been with United Bridge Partners for about 4 years. I oversee the engineering, construction, and operations components. Just for the record, I am an engineer, but not a professional engineer. And secondly, I am not an ex-Colorado Department of Transportation employee. I served as the program manager on the Colorado Bridge Enterprise Program, which was the bridge reconstruction program for the state. And at the time, I ran it for approximately 4 years, and it's a sister enterprise with Nick Faber in the High Performance Transportation Enterprise. So just to clarify that for the record.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so what we do is we really offer what we call an end-to-end or turnkey solution to replace or provide major rehabilitations for bridge projects in need. And essentially what we offer is to fully finance. We work with partners to design, build, and then we'll either lease or own structures and operate and maintain over the long term. Just to answer John's question about specifically our role, we not only provide all of the funding for the project, we then manage the end-to-end project delivery in terms of managing the contractor and the design partners. But then we also operate and maintain our structures in-house over the long term of the contractor ownership period. In terms of our goals, like I said, we use our capital and approach to, solve transportation needs for mostly underfunded government entities. We relieve them of that liability and burden over the long term. And then, as part of our offering, we like to serve our communities really as long-term owners and bridge operators within the community. So moving on to the next slide. So we currently have 5 structures in 4 different states, in addition to 1 operating contract for the tolling back office that I'll discuss. But in terms of our projects and the relevance to the project stipulated here in Hood River, in all of these cases, the public owner didn't have sufficient funding on hand, access to federal and state grants, or the financing capability to fully deliver a project that was needed. These structures were either already closed or a closure would significantly impact the local community around the structure, and therefore, these projects were desired by the community. All of them pass over a navigable waterway and therefore included pretty significant environmental and permitting considerations. And then last, as part of our offering on these projects, we assumed full risk for the end-to-end project delivery, including all long-term operations, maintenance, and customer service capabilities. So moving forward to the next slide. So our first project is the South Norfolk Jordan Bridge. This is in Chesapeake, Virginia. And the way this project came about is that the original truss lift bridge had to be closed due to structural concerns. It was also demolished before we got involved. And essentially, we approached the city to provide 100% of the financing and take end-to-end project delivery risk to replace the bridge. So we executed an acquisition and development agreement directly with the city of Chesapeake, Virginia, and immediately started delivery of the project. So compared to the case we have here, this was not a competitive process. It was a direct contract negotiation with the city of Chesapeake. We were able to build a new $140 million precast concrete segmental structure, about a mile long, and we worked with our construction and design partners to deliver that in less than 2 years. When we opened the bridge, it restored a critical crossing, not only for vehicles, but also pedestrian traffic, trucks, cyclists, and it's also a critical route for the Norfolk Naval Shipyard, which is right on the other end of the structure. On this project, we implemented an all-electronic toll system, and it currently serves about 3 million vehicles per year. You can move to the next slide. So also as part of this operation, we won a contract via RFP process to operate the all-electronic tolling back office for the Dominion Boulevard Bridge, which includes billing, invoicing, collections, and that was really based on our performance and success with our South Norfolk Jordan Bridge. So that contract services about 25,000 cars per day. Next slide.
So this is Kinsley. So I'll jump in here. First off, I want to applaud Jen. I think her presentation was excellent. And I would say that as you enter and contemplating a P3, it's not for the faint of heart. They're very complicated, and you really need to think it through. Personally, I do not like to reference United Bridge Partners as a P3. I like to kind of refer to United Bridge Partners as an alternative funding source for communities like the Port of Hood River that don't have access to its own capital and the limitation at the state and federal dollars, as well as especially go forward with the COVID. Nonetheless, so let's talk a little bit about Klein Avenue Bridge. Klein Avenue Bridge is one of our newer assets. It's located in East Chicago, in Indiana, which is about 45 minutes direct south of Chicago. There was no RFP process associated with this project. Essentially, we sourced this project ourselves, working with the Indiana DOT. There was an exchange agreement where there was a previous structure that the DOT had built and subsequently tore down because of safety reasons. The state was not in position from a prioritization perspective to rebuild the structure. However, the city of East Chicago, who's there, very much wanted the structure rebuilt. So we essentially walked through an exchange agreement with the city and the DOT where we assumed the responsibility to finance, design, operate, and maintain that structure, which we just opened up here right before the holiday on the 23rd of December. So the structure itself is very similar to the structure that you are contemplating for Hood River. It's a precast concrete segmental bridge. It's approximately 6,300 feet long. As you can see in the picture, a very long-term, durable 75-year structure. Itself is, as we pointed out, in this aspect, this was a design-build contract where we sought a contractor and engineer, and they provided the design and construction expertise for the project, and we provided the financing. As I mentioned, that project was just opened here before the holiday, and it's open for traffic going forward. Next slide, Lowell, or Kevin. This is also another one of our recent projects called the Hubert Road Extension Project. This is located in Joliet, Illinois, which is about 40 or 45 minutes southwest of the city of Chicago. It's a new 1.5-mile roadway, brand new, vital transportation link off I-80. It's connected to the largest intermodal facility in the country with the convergence of the BNSF Railroad. Their main line, approximately 40% of all freight goes through that. Our partner, Centerpoint Properties, actually had an RFP process to identify a financial partner. We were successful on winning that. And then we conducted internally our own best value design build procurement and hired a national contractor and engineering firm that we've contracted with, and we're prepared to start this project sometime in Q1 of this year. So this is another example of the public-private partnership where there's a connecting project where the state of Illinois and the city are making improvements at the I-80 interchange that tie into a new 1.5 mile long private roadway that ties in intermodal. And as I mentioned, the design is complete. We're ready to start construction here in March of 2021 with a projected 2023 completion date. So, next slide. There's another recent project for us. It's located in Bay City, Michigan. This project was actually, we started this with an unsolicited proposal similar to, we submitted an unsolicited proposal at Hood River. That unsolicited proposal triggered a competitive process. The city sent out an RFP, and we competed against national firms like Kiewit and the like, and were selected to go ahead and to finance, design, and construct the project. It actually consists of 2 bridges, both bascule or movable bridges. One bridge, the Liberty Bridge, will be rehabilitated, and the Independence Bridge is a full replacement bridge that we will design and construct as well. That project, we spent approximately a year. We were selected back in December of 2019. We spent the year in 2020 working with the Regional Federal Highways, the Michigan Department of Transportation, and eventually advanced legislative authority to go ahead and transact this deal as a lease conveyance. Highly supported by the state. Actually, the Governor Whitmer in her recent State of the State addressed this project specifically as the new way of addressing transportation funding for cities and municipalities that don't have access to state capital dollars, or the whole competitive process for infra and Build America grants as well. So this is 100% funded by us. We are just beginning the environmental process on one of the bridges, and the second bridge we're moving straight into design and construction. And as Ryan mentioned, this is a turnkey for us. So not only to provide the financing, but we bring the contractor, the designer, and eventually the long-term operation and maintenance, as well as the back office billing and collections for the project. So next slide. So that's a sampling of some of the current project portfolios. We wanted to touch on today is different project delivery methods. There's kind of a term that bounces around in the engineering construction community called alternative delivery methods. And that's a fancy way of saying the traditional way, and I think most of us, is an owner, as Janet pointed out, used to hire an engineer to design a project, and then they put the project out for bid, and they would hire a contractor. So that's commonly referred to as a design bid build scenario. It's still used across the country. There are many positives associated with that, but it can be lengthy. And one way that industry has decided to kind of streamline, at least from a procurement standpoint, is you all use alternative delivery methods, which has been recognized by federal highways. And most of these concepts have been around for decades, so they're nothing new. But it's worthwhile pointing out. You have a P3 from a financing method that then uses different project delivery methods. That's worth distinguishing between the difference. So on the left side of the page, you have CMGC, which is construction manager or general contractor, or what's commonly referred to in the industry as CMAR. In that industry model, the owner, and on our projects, what we do is we bring in and we contract directly with a contractor, and then we directly contract with an engineer. And in your aspect, you could do the same thing. And the purpose of this is as the engineer advances the design drawings to complete it for your what they call construction drawings, you've got a contractor that sits at the table that provides real-time input as it relates to construction sequencing, project costs, value engineering. So at the end of the day, essentially, you've got a 100% project that's been fully bought off on by the contractor at the time. So usually what you do is you hire your contractor under what they call a pre-construction services agreement, under the influence that at the end of the project, you have what you call an independent cost estimator. And when they produce the 100% plan set, the contractor, independent cost estimator, needs to be within a certain margin of error, plus or minus 5%, for the owner to go ahead and then give the contractor, the construction contractor, to build the project. I personally, we use this quite a bit when I was running the Carlisle Bridge Enterprise. This is our go-to method here at United Bridge Partners, where we then contract with a designer and a contractor, an independent cost estimator, to deliver the project. And what we find out at the end of the day, you have a contract or a design that's a higher value, which results in less changes as you move forward. So that's commonly referred to as CMGC contract. On the right-hand side of the page is what they call design build, and this is the traditional P3 model where an owner, as yourself, would hire a concessionaire, and that concessionaire team then brings its respective contractor and engineer to the table. So usually the concessionaire, the owner would contract with the concessionaire would then contract with a contractor who then brings the designer to the table. So two very successful business models as it relates to project delivery. You see the design build more in the P3 world. We tend to be leaning more to the CMGC because that affords us a number of benefits from an owner's perspective, that we can select our own designer, we can select our own contractor, and at the end of the day, if we don't get to price agreement, we can go out to the public markets and do our own procurement. So, next slide.
All right, so really, Lowell and others are the experts as it relates to project funding, but one of the questions that we get a lot is, why did the owners we work with decide to, move forward with a P3 or private type project? And, in addition to fostering innovation, accelerating projects, offloading risks, which are certainly major benefits of P3s, majority of the time it comes down to a lack of funding on hand or a lack of access to funding in order to deliver a project. So, what we've found is that a lot of these diminishing public funds, for example, gas taxes, or cumbersome and extremely competitive grants like build, Tiger grants, infra grants, have made it harder to really achieve full funding for projects. And we would commend you guys for getting the build grant that you got last year. That's extremely impressive given how competitive it is. But again, there are a number of options for funding, but given the competitiveness, diminishing sources here, we found that a lot of the public owners we're working with or talking to are looking for more alternative funding sources that we can provide.
Maybe I'll add an example. So on our Bay City project, and similarly, we worked with Bay City for a number of years before we were actually selected, is going through the frustrating. Bay City is a community of approximately 35,000 people. They own two basket bridges with $250 million. They did not have the internal capability of putting out their own bond or taxing. There was restrictions on the city covenant. They attempted to secure money through Michigan DOT, and as Ryan pointed out, and I think most people, is those bridges, one, they weren't owned by the system, they're off-system bridges, is there just wasn't money at the state level. They actually applied to receive an infra and a Build America grant, and they were rejected. So in that instance, the city was adamantly opposed to shutting down the bridges. The citizens wanted to. They provided a huge economic benefit to the city. So in that instance, the only option was a private solution, and fortunately, that we think it worked out best for both the city as well as United Bridge Partners. And as I mentioned, we're rehabilitating and replacing those bridges at this point in time.
Yeah, so moving forward, I'll just touch briefly on these next two topics. In terms of what we've typically seen in terms of a procurement process, as Jen was saying, it's always good to bring on a private party earlier in the process, and that's really been our experience as well. So typically, it is only an RFP process. Timing generally ranges from about 6 months to a year. And there may be, an LOI or some sort of mandatory pre-bid meeting between advertisement and bid submission to get to a short list. But the process that we've laid out on the left here is generally what we've seen. In terms of what's in the RFP and the level of development of the project at the time that it's released, generally there are no design drawings. They haven't been advanced to 15, 30% like you would typically see on a more traditional design bid build. And the scope is also more performance-based versus prescriptive, because the design drawings are not developed yet. We tend to prefer that because, we're in a position to take on the risk of not having 30% design drawings at that point. It also allows for more innovation in what we can offer to the public owner. In terms of selection criteria, what we've seen is that a best value really offers the most value to the public owner as well, in terms of a mix of experience, the technical proposal, and then the financial offer and tolling package for the public owner as well. We can move to the next slide. Touching very briefly on our point of view on tolling, our goal is always to offer the most community-friendly and really lowest toll structure possible for the community. And a lot of times we get asked, well, why do we have to charge tolls? Really, it comes down to recouping our capital investment for what we put into the project, and then covering long-term operations and maintenance. And what I can say is, a lot of people have the misconception or assume that once the private entity gets involved, they're just going to jack up the toll rates as high as possible. We're really not incentivized to do that. Given driver price sensitivity, driver behavior, we are incentivized to offer the lowest toll rate possible so that drivers continue to use our structures. The other thing I'll say is that, tolling programs have to be catered to each individual community. So there's no one-size-fits-all type tolling package. And there's several options to really subsidize or reduce tolls. And it's really all dependent on the community needs, demographics, things like that. There are also, other options other than just pure tolling that might include availability payments, shadow tolls, or other types of revenue streams. On our projects, they've always been just pure toll, full risk projects, but there are other options as well. And then just the last thing I'd say is from a private perspective, some degree of flexibility is important over the long term. And, I would just say, usually what we see in contracts is that the initial toll rate is agreed upon. And then, the process for any modifications in the future are typically detailed within the P3 contract that's agreed to with the public owner. So I'll pause there. That concludes our presentation here, and we can open it for any questions.
Yeah, I think we're only have time maybe for one question. Any questions from the group? And I just wanted to clarify, Ryan, that all of your projects that you guys are long-term participants in, they are tolled correctly?
That's right. Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
I had a question just regarding the tolling. In the examples that you just outlined, are any of those bridges, or have you done a project where there's still an option of a cash-based toll system, or are they all across the board cashless or an easy pass type approach?
Yeah, so all of our projects are all electronic toll facilities. That being said, we're certainly open to a hybrid type of tolling system that might include a cash-based payment option.
Well, it's not just Easy Pass. Most of the systems now also have toll by plate. So those are picked up post pay. So there's also a lot of options that exist today where people can cash, essentially have a toll card that can be cash generated and you can go to the bank, or, you know, people do it at drugstores or things like that where they replenish them. So there's a lot of options like that today to get people that operate cash to do that. So
Yeah,
there's
I
a
guess
lot
I'm more trying to identify, often those options end up with administrative or late fees, or there's another component than impacting that user or the actual bridge passenger car. So just trying to understand if you've ever seen or worked on a project where you've maintained that cash-based tolling system as an option in physical form at a bridge location.
It's not typically the new method is not to include cash. So that's not to say it can't be done, but that's not really where the industry's headed. So it's to provide free movement so that people don't have to stop. So Nick, are you with us?
I'm here.
Okay. Well, Nick, I'll do a brief introduction. Glad you could join us, and I hope your meeting went well.
It did actually run really well. Thank you.
Nick Farber is a director of the High Performance Transportation Enterprise, which is part of the Colorado Department of Transportation, and is executive director of that. He looks at major projects for CDOT for innovative ways to deliver them. And sometimes that's P3, sometimes it's not. Some cases they do design build where they provide financing for the project as part of it, and they've done that a lot with express lanes, which Nick will go through. Nick started with the group as a staff and worked his way up to executive director, and before that he worked with the national legislative group for the states. So very familiar with how things operate in government and around the country. And with that, Kevin and Nick, I'll turn it over to you two.
Hey, thank you all. As Lowell was saying, yeah, I've been with the HPTE, or the High Performance Transportation Enterprise, for almost 10 years. I started right when we started procuring the US 36 project, which I will discuss with you guys here in a little bit. I'm just talking about today. We are a pretty broad office, but we'll talk a little bit more about our public-private partnership delivery method selection. Kevin, if you could just go to the next slide. So a little bit about us. Back in the early 1990s, Colorado voters approved a constitutional amendment called TABOR, or Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and that required a vote of the people anytime the government, no matter if it's a state government or a local government, or some sort of taxing district, like a water district or a Parks and Rec district, anytime they want to raise revenue, they have to go to a vote of the people. And that's either raising it through taxes or raising it through a bonding measure. But the constitutional amendment had a workaround for that, and it's called enterprises. So a government is a government-owned business. The catch is that the enterprise has to raise 90% of its own revenue, and 10% can come from the state. With the transportation funding picture at the end of the last recession, we were formed out of a bill they called FASTER, the Funding Advancements for Surface Transportation and Economic Recovery Act. So we're a government-owned business. We're a division of CDOT, but we're governed by our own board. CDOT is governed by a transportation commission. We have 3 transportation commission members and 4 other members appointed by the governor from areas around the state, like North Front Range, like the Fort Collins area, Denver metro area, Colorado Springs metro area, and the Mountain Corridor. In our statute, we're required to aggressively pursue innovative means of more efficiently financing important surface transportation infrastructure projects. So it's been anything but airports. We can do that through public-private partnerships, operating concession agreements, user fee-based project financing through tolls. So if CDOT's short on a project, we can fill that hole if if a study shows that we can, through charging tolls and annual performance payment agreements. Next slide, Kevin. Our mission is to partner with CDOT, the private industry, and local communities to aggressively pursue innovative financing alternatives not otherwise available to the state. Like I said, we can toll, we can borrow without the need for an election. CDOT cannot. Our mission is also quickly deliver transportation infrastructure options that improve mobility. So we're, on US 36 project, which I'll discuss a little later, we partner with RTD, the local transit provider, to provide BRT up and down US 36, and as a part of that project. And lastly, our mission is to also communicate openly with all stakeholders. And that's a lesson learned from our US 36 project, which I'll go into a little bit as well. Next slide. So over the last 10 plus years, we've been working on our express lane network around the Denver metro area and around the state. Everything in blue is open. So we have 115 lane miles of express lanes open and operating in the state, and another 108 or so under construction. So in the next couple of years, we'll have 223 lane miles of express lanes throughout the state, connecting Denver to the Colorado Springs area. We have a recreational express lane coming down from the mountain corridor, and we'll be opening up the other side of the highway going up to the mountains here in the next couple of months. And we just opened our C470 express lane project, which is the west side ring road around the Denver metro area. Next slide. So in the last 10 years, managed lanes projects have delivered $3.1 billion of funding to the state, and then 1.27 billion of that has been secured through the use of managed lanes. Obviously 60% coming from the state and 40% coming from funding sources like Infra and Tiger. And a big portion of that is TIFIA, pullback revenue bonds, and other construction loans that we've taken out with banks. And through our public-private partnerships, we've secured $125 million of total private equity contributions. So that's $3.1 billion of projects that would not have been available had we not existed. Next slide. So as I said, we are governed by a board. So you have the HPD board. We work very closely with the Transportation Commission and CDOT. I work very closely with the CDOT executive director on all of our projects. We work also very closely with the Colorado Bridge Enterprise. They're, as Ken was saying, they're our sister agency. Every time you register your car in the state, you pay a small bridge fee. I just registered my car. I paid $18 towards that, and that goes towards bridge replacements here in the state of Colorado. And then in our office, we're a very small office, and so, we have that since we're an enterprise. So we rely on consultants to help us out: financial advisors, legal advisors, engineering advice, auditors to oversee contracts and the like. So we are a lean office, but we are now starting to collect a little bit more in toll revenue and can defray a lot of the budget hit that we used to take on CDOT. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit more about our procurement overview. So when CDOT is considering private investment, it's not HPT wagging the dog. CDOT leads the process. They decide what project to build. They decide how much money is available and for how long. They outline the expectations of the project. CDOT always retains ownership rights on projects where we operate and collect the toll revenues ourselves. CDOT gives us a license to operate the express lane. If it's a P3 operator, we give them a license to operate the express lanes. And that's So it's always the asset's always in the public's hands. And we're able to also protect against the private company bankruptcy and other defaults. Next slide. So when CDOT comes to us and asks us to explore the possibility of financing, we take a very close look at construction and lifecycle costs to make sure that the toll rate we could charge will cover that people are willing to pay, will cover, will offset the delta in the amount of funding we need. And we provide a matrix of risk to identify a best value, so that through a value for money report and a risk register. And the risk we consider, if we're considering doing a P3, are we going to raise enough toll revenue to in the early years to cover debt service? If not, maybe a toll revenue risk deal is the best. If we are, and there's other risks that we don't want to, that we would like to hand off to the private sector, and we feel the private sector is best to handle that risk, maybe an availability payment model P3 is the best. We also look at long-term annual capital maintenance costs, obviously because of the downturn in the economy right now, and just the strain on the gas tax in the state of Colorado. Operations and maintenance is a big, and long-term operations and maintenance on express lanes are something that is at the forefront of our thought right now. And if you hand it over to a developer, in the concession agreement or project agreement, you have a set schedule of things that they're supposed to take care of and to what level. And if they're not, you can charge non-compliance points. So it's always a trade-off that we're trying to think about. Also, is there design or construction or schedule and scope potential risks that we can hand off? Do we need to get the project done in a certain amount of time? Is there some design that's just maybe a little too intricate for us, or that the private sector would be better thinking about than us? Or could we get more scope out of the project? If we, like we did on US 36, we could only fund it up to a certain point. Could we expand the scope and get the project done sooner? Those are the things that we're constantly thinking about for analyzing a project as a P3. Next slide. And I think you've seen this chart before. I think this is in our P3 management manual that will help immensely on helping us create. And it goes through the process of us figuring out whether or not a project is good for a P3. Obviously, a major project is, we really didn't want to define it, but it's usually generally something over $100 million. If it's $100 million, it's probably not a P3. You usually see developers want something between the, I've heard $500 million range with, US 36 was $300 million. So it can be done at a lower cost range, but usually developers want to see a bigger project. When we reach the value for money, that green rectangle right there, kind of in the center of the screen, that's where we're taking a closer look at, if we're handing off some of those risks and saving the costs on those risks, can you then provide best value to the state by handing off those risks, and like the toll revenue risk or hazardous waste risk, utility risk, schedule risk, things like that, and save the state money, and maybe shrink some of your operations costs, and provide a reliable asset, an asset that's going to be cared for over time back to the state. On our C4, when we did that on our Central 70 project, the answer was yes. The project brought a P3 selection brought best value, and then we worked through the procurement process. On our C470 project, which was about $275 million, so a little less than the $500 million threshold. It also just didn't have a lot of risk that we felt like we could hand off to a developer. And we also heard from the developer industry that the project just didn't have that risk profile that they were looking for. So we you procured it, CDOT procured it on its own as a design build, and HPT brought a considerable amount of financing to the project. CDOT put in $50 million, and we brought the rest to the table through TIFIA loans and tollback revenue bonds. Next slide, please. So when we procure as a P3, this is spelled out in our P3 management manual as well. We haven't taken into account, I think, the recent kind of shift towards pre-development agreements, or PDAs. I think that's something we might want to look into in the future, that Maryland is looking at, the LA Metro with the Sepulveda Pass. It's kind of it's kind of a hybrid of the CMGC delivery method, which CDOT is, the pendulum is starting to swing a little bit more towards, a little bit away from design build, but more towards CMGC. So I think that's something we'll take a look at in the near future. But if we do a traditional design build, finance, operate, and maintain, we'll do a two-part procurement process where we issue an RFQ, and we put it on our website for 60 days. We shortlist. We would like to shortlist between 3 and 5, but if need be, we'll shortlist 2 if we only get 2 qualified bids, or SOQs, I should say. And because if you shortlist 3, 1 might drop out, then you only have 2. But if you shortlist 4 and 1 drops out, you still have 3 bidding on the process. And that's what just happened with the Maryland managed lanes P3. They shortlisted 4 and 1 dropped, so they're just about to pick one of the 3 that were shortlisted. We then issue the RFP to the shortlisted proposers, and then we select best value proposer based on the evaluation criteria set forth in the RFP. Next slide. Take a sip of water here. The evaluation is based on which proposer has brought best value to the state. Obviously, first we look at to see if everything is there in the proposal, if they provided all the information we've asked for. If they haven't, their proposal is set aside and it has failed, and it's not considered at all. If it passes, it'll be ranked according to the technical and financial evaluation criteria set forth in the RFP. And the apparent best value is based on the highest total score that we set out in the RFP as well. Next slide. Once the proposer with the best value for money has been selected, we then update the value for money. We did, way back on that slide I showed you a couple minutes ago. So we have to show that the value for money has to show that the preferred proposer's bid results in the best value to the state as compared to a public sector comparator bid. Then when we take that to the board, the HPT board for approval, and we move forward with the preferred bidder. We talk about any changes to the project agreement, if there's any material changes discovered after selection, if they have a change in team members, or of a change in equity participation. Then we also will pay a stipend to the shortlisted bidders who submitted a passing proposal. On US 36, that was, I think, $500,000. I think it was $1 million on the Central 70 project. And that comes out of state funds. Next slide. Once the evaluation of the value for money shows that their bid is will bring value to the taxpayers, and it meets the value for money study that we procured. We have reached commercial close, excuse me. Basically, it's a signing of the document, and then the developer then brings that the project agreement or the concession agreement to the private market and then funds their financial plan set forth in their proposal. And once that is completed, we've reached financial close and we move on to the implementation phase, which is construction. And once construction's over, then we're into the operations phase. On our US 36 project, the construction was done in 2016, and we've been, Plenary Roads Denver has been operating and maintaining that ever since. And on the Central 70 project, Hewitt Meridian Partners is now about a little over halfway done with construction, and will be finalizing the project at the end of next year. And then that will move into the 30-year operations phase. Next slide. So when I started at the HPT in 2011, we had just closed on a US DOT Build America Bureau. I think it wasn't the Build America Bureau at the time, but it was the TIFIA JPO. We had just closed on a $54 million TIFIA loan, which allowed us to build about half of the project. I think that first blue line on this slide. The stakeholders along the project really wanted to finish it all the way up to Boulder, but CDOT did not have the funding to do that until 2035. Oh no, I misspoke. We actually had public funding to finish up the first line, and then the $54 million allowed us to take it to that blue line where it says phase 1 ends and phase 2 begins, but we couldn't finish it all the way up to Boulder. So when I started, the director at the time decided to move forward, and the board approved moving forward with a public-private partnership on this project. Our analysis showed that the toll revenue we would have earned in the short term, I think until the mid-2020s, was a little less than debt service would have been. So we felt as though a toll revenue risk P3 was appropriate for this project. So this project has express lanes all the way from Boulder, from the Table Mesa exit, all the way down into the downtown Denver. It connects with the I-25 reversible express lanes that Plenary also operates and maintains. It also has a, as I said earlier, BRT component to it. RTD, the Regional Transportation District, operates center bus loading stations, some center bus loading stations on it, and some on the outside of the highway. Before the pandemic hit, they saw ridership increase 45% on the corridor because the express lanes were providing guaranteed travel time into downtown Denver. And people knew when they got on the bus, they were going to get to where they're going on time instead of sitting in congestion. Next slide. As I said, the preferred proposer on US 36 was Plenary Roads Denver. They designed, built, and financed phase 2 so that blue line from west up into Boulder. They operated and maintained all of US 36 and the I-25 express lanes for 50 years. They cover all operations and maintenance expenses in the express lane itself. They're responsible for all the tolling equipment, replacing pavement, and crack seals, pothole repair, snow and ice removal in the express lanes. They also do it in the general purpose lanes. However, but we came to an amount that CDOT pays them every year to cover that expense, which is indexed to inflation. As I said, they're reimbursed through toll revenues, and they pay back the debt they raised on the project through those toll revenues. As I talked about earlier, the state retains ownership of the highway, and they have a license. CDOT granted them a license to operate the express lanes. And if they fail to meet specified performance standards set forth in the concession agreement, they can incur financial penalties. I'm happy to say we've never got there before. We've given them warnings. I think there was a freak snowstorm on Christmas Eve a couple years ago, and it was just a warning. And I think that's about it. So far they, in the 5 years they've been operating the project, they've done a really good job, and we're very happy with how they operate and maintain not only US 36 but I-25. Next slide. Kevin and Lowell were telling me that some of you are concerned about how you protect the public in these long-term public-private partnership agreements, either if it's an availability payment for 30 years or if it's a toll revenue risk deal that could be a little bit longer. So what controls are there for the tolls? So in the concession agreement, the board, the HPT board and statute has the authority to approve all toll rate increases. So if I want a toll rate increase on I-25 or the Mountain Expressway, I go to the board and I have to justify that toll rate increase. Same thing with plenary. They have to come to the board and justify a toll rate increase. The board can deny it. The board can say, no, you're not getting a toll rate increase, and they can do it for any reason they want. However, the concession agreement spells out 5 reasons why that they can give they can deny plenary the right to increase tolls without incurring a penalty. So if plenary comes to us and has a valid reason that doesn't fit within those 5 reasons for the board to deny, and the board denies anyway, one of the things they have to do when they give us a request for toll rate increase is give us an estimate on the incremental difference between what they were earning before the toll rate increase and what they would earn after. And then HPT would owe them the delta between those 2 points. Some of those things are, if the toll rate increase was not in compliance with the contract. So if it went above the maximum toll rate that we set out in the concession agreement, I think it's like $13. It was $13 set out in 2013, so it's obviously increased per CPI since then. So if it goes above the maximum toll rate, we can deny it. If we feel as though and can demonstrate that the toll rate increase would affect the safety of the whole corridor, if it would slow down buses, because we actually said that buses have to maintain a 55-mile-an-hour speed, or affect speeds on I-25, or it affected the other goals we set out in the concession agreement. Also, people along the community were saying when we procured this that, and I think United Bridge Partners was saying earlier that one of the concerns is like, oh, they're just going to raise tolls and rake in all the cash, and the communities will never see it, and they're going to just have a huge windfall, and that never comes back to us. And that's not true. We've capped their internal rate of return. We said, here's your IRR. That's it. Once you go above that IRR, we kick into a cash sharing mechanism that's set out in the contract. So if they're going gangbusters out there, they're not right now, but hopefully, once the pandemic is behind us and they are back to normal, and they're going gangbusters and they're earning well above the revenue they projected, and they hit their IRR and they start going above that, we'll start HPT, CDOT, we'll start seeing some of that cash come back to us. So incentivizes them to do a good job, and it makes us root for them too as well. And how do we address poor service delivery? If equipment's failing, signs are going down, signs are saying the wrong toll rate, if there's trash on the highway for too long, if potholes aren't filled, if signs are, I think I said signs are down, or guardrail is not repaired. We've set all of that out in the concession agreement on how long they have to pick up the trash, how long do they have to fix the sign, how long do they have to fix the guardrail. And if it's not fixed within that certain time frame, and we have someone who drives the corridor 2-3 times a week and who's noting things and actually telling them about it. And if they don't fix it within a certain amount of time, we go to them and say, we're issuing you non-compliance points. And if they hit a threshold, then we start holding back toll revenue that is due to them. And if they go bankrupt, God forbid, the highway comes back to us. We get an asset that back to the state. That's in the condition it is at the time. We take over all their assets, and maybe we turn it back to the market, which happened in Indiana, in Southern California. And I think people have a misconception about what happens if a P3 developer goes bankrupt on a project. Yeah, it's bad for them. They lose their equity, but it's actually, it has been a good thing for states. So I really don't want it to happen, but if it does happen, we get an asset back, almost a brand new asset back, maybe 5-6 years old, that's being kept up to a higher level of service than CDOT can even do it. So, it might cost us a little bit more in the short term, more budget to maintain it while we're trying to find someone else to operate it. But in the long run, I think it's still a good thing for the state. And what happens when the P3 contract is over? Do they give us a 50-year-old road? No. There's handback requirements. In year 35, year 40, they need to start bringing the assets up to a certain level of standard. So when we get it back in year 50, it's not a 50-year-old asset. It's maybe like a 10, 7, 5-year-old asset that we can. So we're not just dumping more money into it in year 50. And you see that in all P3 contracts, handback requirements. And I think that's all I had. I don't think that's any more slides. Yep. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Nick, this is Fred Cowell here at the port of Hood River. I guess one of the things when we look at, when I look at tolling and your modeling, right? Traffic and your modeling costs, part of that cost structure is your debt. And then you got to recover those costs and then some just due to coverage requirements and so forth. How the other part of that equation to keep tolls reasonable, at least to a level where you don't get as much backlash, is usually in your modeling, you can extend the period, meaning instead of getting a 20-year or 30-year payback, you extend it a little further. Mm-hmm. So one of my questions is, in some of your projects, have you had to do that? And how far did you have to go with it, extending it to get a rate that's community acceptable?
We've only done one toll revenue risk, and that's US 36, and that was the 50-year concession agreement. And I just don't think you'll see any.
Yeah, which is pretty normal.
Yep.
Fred, that you're going to go longer when you're doing a toll revenue risk. Typically 50 is about average. Some of them go a little bit longer.
Right.
Some of them go a little bit shorter, but I would say 50 is probably about average.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's the Northwest Parkway here in the state that did a 99-year lease, I think in the early 2000s. I just don't see, I don't think you'll ever see that again.
Well, and that was also a highly risk project.
Yep.
Because there was no existing tolls at all. It was a brand new facility, so they didn't know what the tolls were going to be. So it was much different than the Hood River situation.
Yeah, and Fred, one of the projects that I'm going to be talking about shortly, the Belle Chase in Louisiana, the main premise of selection was least amount of tolls for the least amount of time. And in that one, we have a 30-year limit and a very dedicated and outlined toll regime per vehicle class type, per residential class type, local versus distant, and that became a part of the project agreement, and we have to live by that.
So a couple of quick questions, Nick, before we move on. You mentioned a stipend. You might give them a little bit of an idea how you decide if you're going to do a stipend and kind of the amount.
I think developers want to see it first of all, because they're putting up a lot of money to put together these bids. And the amount, I forget on US 36, I know it was $500,000.
It was 0.2%, Nick.
Okay. Thanks to that. And I think it was around the same for Central 70. You want it to be fair enough so you're not covering all the costs of the bid, but you want it to be fair enough where you're encouraging people to stay and finish the bid on the project. If you're offering nothing and you don't get picked, it's a lot of money and time and effort.
Painful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and typically you get stronger bids when you do offer some level of stipend, and you also get to keep whatever plans they developed. They may have ideas in there that you want to incorporate into the one that is awarded, for example.
Yeah, stipends typically do not cover costs. They are intended to incentivize two things. First, a bit more engagement from the design side when the developer is working with a design builder in order to de-risk the project and ultimately reduce the capex, the capital cost of the project that will be built into the NPV or to the net present value. And then the second item, or the second reason for a stipend, as Nick mentioned, is the fact that if a compliant, non-successful bidder accepts the stipend, the corollary to that is that you now have the intellectual property rights over anything that was in their bid. And then you can take those and incorporate them into the winning bid if you choose to do so. Or use them in other locations for other purposes, depending on how you write the PA.
Well, Sia, the good news is you're now up. So, Kevin, if you want to bring up Sia's presentation, I think we're ready to move to that stage.
Right.
First of all, I want to thank Nick, and for the record, I did not ask him to say anything nice about us, about US 36 or 25 express lanes, and actually, I'm going to be talking about those as well. We can go to the next slide, please, Kevin, real quick. I'm going to talk about three different project case studies, all in transport, but just to give you a sense of who Plenary is, for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We are the leading P3 long-term investor, equity investor, developer, and operator of public infrastructure. What sets us apart from our colleagues at United Bridge Partners is we do not believe in private ownership or private leasing of a public infrastructure asset. So all of our 46 assets that you see in operation, the 6 that are currently under design and construction, over $20 billion worth of programs that we manage, public ownership is an absolute must. We not only advocate for it, but if a project is some sort of a monetization or a private sale or an acquisition development deal, we do not pursue those because our philosophy is public ownership of infrastructure. So we can go to the next one, please. The three projects I'm going to talk about, the first one is what we call the Pennsylvania Rapid Bridge Replacement Program. It is roughly about $1 billion in value. It provided an opportunity for the state of Pennsylvania to replace over 558 bridges in a period of less than 5 years. The project was awarded in 2015. It was completed in 2018. The original schedule was 4 years. We were able to do substantial completion in 3 years, and it's currently under the operation. Plenary's role was project sponsor, financial arranger, and equity investor. You can see our design build partners and our engineers and who actually is doing that, the actual operation. One of the things we say in our P3 business is that once you've done one P3, you've done just one P3. Every deal is different. Every client needs and objectives are different. And one of the things that we really push for in order to get advisors and owners and folks that are looking at P3s to consider is really identifying this thing, what we call project readiness. And for project readiness, to qualify it or to quantify it, I think Jen talked about this earlier in her presentation. There have to be the absolute right objectives. Why are you looking to do a P3? P3s are not funding mechanisms the way we look at them. P3s are a financing mechanism. And as a financing mechanism, how do you, what are your objectives? There has to be political leadership. And the political leadership cannot be just for the initial gold shovel and turning dirt or for the ribbon cutting. A public-private partnership, especially if it's a total revenue risk-based project, typically 50 years plus. And in that type of a scenario, you literally are getting married. And the partnership is a key element of this conversation. So the political leadership on behalf of the owner has to sustain the life of the concession. The third element is the performance criteria that you expect from that particular asset. What are your long-term objectives of how that particular asset has to operate? What are the types of things you're looking for? Quite frankly, it doesn't matter to specify if you want 2 or 3 inches of pavement. It doesn't matter whether or not you specify you want concrete or a steel bridge. What's critical are things like project life, design life, operational characteristics, performance requirements with respect to the asset itself, and so on and so forth. The next very critical item is risk transfer. What are the types of risks that you want to retain as an owner? What are the types of risks that the private sector partner can absorb and can take over? Typically in a P3, schedule certainty, cost certainty, performance certainty. Those are the types of risks that almost every P3 developer concessionaire should be able to accept without too much difficulty. Next element of project readiness is the long-term approach to operations and maintenance, as well as handback requirements. How do you want to receive this particular asset back? I mean, those are the types of things that you have to think through. And next very big key element for us is, have you as an owner identified all the stakeholders that are going to be involved in the project? Not only stakeholders that are party to the project agreement, state, city, municipality, county, authorities, federal agencies, and so on and so forth, but also all the non-contractual parties that are stakeholders in a particular project. There are plenty of examples of this particular group, the non-contractual parties, not having been at the table and ultimately having caused significant delays in a particular project. And then last but not least, this entire discussion of ESG and diversity and inclusion, how you look at the performance of that asset, what are your goals and objectives with respect to, greening, what are your objectives with respect to inclusivity, diversity, governance, environmental impact, structural and social justice, and so on and so forth. And I think those are all the types of things that you could build into a P3 agreement in order to be able to not only deliver the asset day one, but also be able to build on the community impacts and the benefits of a partnership with the private sector over the course of 30, 40, 50 years. So in the Pennsylvania Bridge projects, as I mentioned, we were able to work with our design build partners and provided, significant modularization. The joint venture was responsible for very specific procurement of key materials, construction components, and a big chunk of that entire program really had to do with, again, making sure that local workforce is being used, local suppliers are being used, inclusivity, diversity of the entire process. With respect to innovations, it was the first multi-asset P3 in the US. It was the largest private activity bond for a P3 transaction, over $720 million. And it was really the first PPP that used a performance bond with an accelerated education process and was able to provide investors comfort. Now, that may not mean anything to you, but I can assure you it certainly means a lot to the contractors, because when you're talking about these large scale projects, typically lenders in a P3 environment are looking for liquid letters of credit such that if a contractor can't deliver, then they can cash in the letter of credit. They can go through and bring somebody else on board fairly quickly. You can go to the next slide, please, Kevin. The next one I'm not going to spend too much time on because Nick already spent quite amount of time on this one with respect to Colorado's US 36. That was a project that was roughly about $200 million. And Nick mentioned that typically major developers in the P3 space would scoff at things below $500 million. I hate to disagree with them. The smallest asset we have in our portfolio is less than $65 million, although our biggest one is over $2 billion. But quite frankly, what's critical about setting the size of a particular P3 project has more to do with how you set up the financing structure, how long of a term do you expect in your concession, and so on and so forth. As Nick mentioned, Colorado US 36 is a 50-year concession. We not only designed, built, and took over the managed lanes in the new portion of the managed lane and express lane process, we also took over the managed lanes and fence to fence for the rest of US 36 into downtown Boulder, as well as the I-25 express lanes. And we're going to maintain this thing and with very significant handback requirements, as well as ongoing operational and performance requirements. Next slide, please. I won't bore you with design details, but a couple of the things that are critical is the improvement to the BRT, new displays in terms of electric displays, new HOVs. There's the all electronic tolling that's being put in place, and then improvements to the RTD stations where the bus rapid transit facilities, where the stations are, in terms of some of the improvements that had to be done as a part of our performance requirement. Next slide, please. Some of the innovations, and I think I'm going to skip to really the second one, because the first one, the only critical element is initially we were doing time of day pricing, and now we are working towards what we call fully dynamic. Now, prior to the pandemic, we were pretty close to implementing the full dynamic tolling mechanism, again, in order to do the types of things Nick talked about with respect to the free flow movement of the buses and so on and so forth. But because of the pandemic and a significant drop in ridership or in vehicles using the facility, we have kind of halted that. What's critical here with respect to innovation in terms of financing, what's critical are the following. The Plenary Roads Denver, we actually walked through a process that did 4 different tranches of debt and 2 liens in addition to the sponsor's equity. We put equity in as a part of the financing package. We assumed HPTE's current obligations from the first phase of the project. That was a $54 million TIFIA loan. We issued about $20 million worth of additional parity for PABs. We also entered into a $60 million TIFIA loan in order to keep the cost of financing down. And then finally, we put in $20 million of subordinated debt And we are also continuing to provide equity into the operation. And I say that because the premise behind lack of funding is real. But as I mentioned, when you think through project readiness, you don't necessarily need to monetize your assets just because you don't have immediate access to funding. There are plenty of different ways that by working with the advisors, by working with the federal government and your P3 partner, you can identify additional sources of funding. The next project I'm going to talk about, I'll share some more with that. Next slide, please. And here's the thing I was talking about in terms of ESG and the diversity and inclusion and so on and so forth. Every P3 project, if implemented properly, when you sit there and you identify clearly your objectives and you have the right partner in place, you can significantly impact the surrounding communities in terms of jobs, in terms of availability of transport for people that are underrepresented, for access, for mobility, for safety, and so on and so forth. And you can see some of the impacts that we have had over the surrounding area of US 36. Next slide, please. The third project I'm going to talk to you about is a recent win for us. It's Belle Chase Bridge and Tunnel Replacement Project. This is a project with an overall net present value of $169 million, which basically is not only the initial design and construction, but it's also long-term operations, maintenance, and major rehab of the project for 30 years. This particular project, Plenary, we are the only equity investor. We're the financial advisor arranger. We're also the bridge maintenance and tolling operations entity. We hired through competitive process a construction joint venture. With the construction joint venture, we selected the design partner, and then we also have operations and maintenance responsibility over this facility for the 30 years, as well as operations and maintenance responsibility over the existing facility, a bridge and a tunnel, while we're building this new asset for the Louisiana Department of Transportation and Development. So we were able to take over that. And then additionally, very similar to our colleagues at United Bridge Partners, we're also working with Louisiana DOTD on some of that back office and some other projects in order to provide synergies for them. In this particular project, the intent is to replace an existing two-lane vertical lift bridge, as well as a two-lane tunnel under the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway along Louisiana 23 with a single 4-lane fixed-span bridge that has pedestrian and bike lanes and so on and so forth. Alongside of it, remove the existing bridge, decommission and demolish the tunnel, and then take over the responsibility of the program over the next 30 years. Next slide, please. That particular project was won in December of 2019, and we are about, it was financially closed in January of 2019, literally within 45 days between commercial close and financial close. And then we were able to go through design permitting process, and we are about to break ground the 4th week of February this year. Project background, you can see the vertical lift bridge, very, very old. It was built back in the tunnel was in 56, the bridge was in 68. The center span of the existing bridge has to be raised every time either a Navy vessel or one of the big ships go through the intercoastal waterway. The operating rules maintain vehicular traffic flow during peak periods, which basically restricts both naval ships as well as commercial traffic for the use of the canal down below it. Next slide, please. The basic premise for selection in this project, and this is something that the Governor of the State of Louisiana, the DOT Secretary, advisors, and everybody else involved from day one announced publicly. The project will be won if and only if the lowest toll rates are applied, for the least amount of time or the shortest amount of time. It has to be an interoperable toll system. There has to be a significantly reduced need for future maintenance and rehabilitation of existing structures. There has to be, the bridge itself has to be high quality, durable, and maintainable infrastructure. The design life requirement on this one are over 150 years. It has to maintain and enhance the community infrastructure connections. The existing alignment, because it is a vertical lift bridge, blends into the surrounding neighborhood, and there are parks and homes and businesses. By the time we are going to a fixed span mid-rise bridge at 74 feet of clearance, we had to make sure that the community was not bifurcated. Again, because of ESG and because of DEI requirements, we had to make sure that social justice issues, inclusivity issues, governance, and environmental impact issues were all the commitments that were made in the environmental document were being built into this particular program. We also had to make sure that the DOTD was very comfortable with our O&M approach, operations and maintenance approach, not only for the infrastructure itself, but for the tolling, because this again is a all electronic tolling facility plus toll by plate facility. And we wanted, and a part of the PA, and one of the things we wanted to see happen was certainly bringing a certain degree of comfort for Louisiana DOTD to make sure that their toll facilities and their toll operations, not only for this project and future projects, could all be combined into a single back office location. We had to maintain public service and public safety access, not only during the design and construction, but also making sure that in the future, when the new bridge is in place, all of those current accesses are actually improved, and we had to make sure that there is absolute minimization of inconvenience to travelers, both on the waterway as well as over the bridge. We are also working adjacent to a railroad and make sure that we were not impacting their operations. Innovation in construction methods to minimize disruption. One of the things that was very, very clear from early on is that for a variety of reasons, some environmental, some construction, and so on and so forth, there had to be a very specific span arrangements and so on and so forth with regard to the bridge in order to make sure that there are no piers in the water. Now, in your situation, that's not the case, but here that actually allowed us to come up with a span arrangement and construction methodology that reduced the initial construction cost and ultimately will reduce maintenance and operation costs, culminating into a lower net present value of the entire program, which again translated into a much lower toll rates, both initially early on today, as well as 30 years down the road. Last but not least, one of the things that was very, very critical, Louisiana One, which is the only other facility that's been contemplated for tolling, had to have access to our back office in order to be able to combine toll operations for the synergies, as I had mentioned. And that had to be built into all of our conversations with the department. Next slide, please. Here's a list of dates. We are currently in design and construction, and the bridge will be operational in 2024, and the demolition of the existing bridge and the tunnel will be completed by spring of 2025. Next, please. Here's how that particular deal was structured. Louisiana DOTD was the owner. We had a comprehensive agreement with them. We are the developer, Plenary Chase, Bell Chase. We went to the debt markets and we worked with different lenders, ultimately ended up with Sun Life Assurance as the only outside entity that provided all of the debt to us. From our side, we had the Plenary Group Canada, which is our parent company, provided the guarantee, the overall guarantee. Equity member, very specifically, was in terms of a concession, what we call the SPV or Project Co. That equity member was Plenary Group USA. So the debt and equity came into the SPV. We also have management services agreement between Plenary USA and the developer that not only provides the oversight of design and construction, but also oversight of our long-term operations and management. As you can see in the org chart, we then selected a design build partner. The design build partner contracted with a design consultant. We have a tolling contract, which is Plenary Group and Capsh that runs the back office. And then we have an operations and maintenance agreement for the 30 years. And that is, again, is Plenary Group and DBI Services. In order to not only protect our interests, but in order to make sure that we adhere to and we provide the oversight in order to guarantee performance compliance, we would like to be in all the boxes. And that's how we fairly set up the same deal here as we have engagement in, for example, in US 36 that was talked about previously. Next slide, please. The approach, again, as I mentioned this, because we had to have the least tolls for the least amount of time, we wanted to make sure that design and construction and maintenance were optimized to the best way possible. In order to make sure that happened, we engaged from a developer's perspective, our design and construction folks. I'm an engineer, been in the business 40 years, and we have a full team that engages with our design build partners, engages with our operations and maintenance folks, engages with our toll operators to make sure that every element that is being designed or is being implemented by those team members has the ultimate goal of not only meeting the performance specification as laid out by the owner, but they also help us reduce the overall net present value of a particular project. As you can see, the different bridge elements were put together, and that's how we were able to reduce MPV, therefore reducing toll rates. Next slide, please. I won't bore you with the design details, but again, we had to make sure that we met all the design requirements to replace what the two facilities were there today. And then as a part of, again, the ESG, the governance and so on and so forth, we had to put a significant amount of time and resources in all the incorporated and unincorporated areas, as well as the overall surrounding area, including the areas that would be under the shadow of the bridge, to make sure that the sense of community, the sense of connectivity, all of that remained in place. And was improved as a part of the project. Next slide, please. The tolling approach, we had discounted rates for the residents of Plaquemines Parish, which is the local parish. And Kevin and I were first talking about this particular project. The fair amount of the folks who use this particular facility live on one side of the bridge and do commerce and business, everything from recreation to shopping to hospital care to religious entities and so on and so forth on the other side of the bridge. So it was very, very critical that there was a discounted mechanism for people who live within that zip code and do business in that zip code. So we basically have multiple tiers for our tolling in the tolling regime. So we have discounted rates for the residents of Plaquemines Parish. We have lower rates for transponders. We actually gave every resident of Plaquemines Parish who would traverse this particular bridge a transponder at no cost. And then the license plates, or what we call toll by plate, was primarily used for non-local and infrequent drivers, and a great majority of the truck traffic that goes across this particular facility. So you can see in the table below, the local transponders, the local license plate. We also have different classes of vehicles for the tolling mechanism. So this was all done in full transparency, public involvement, public input, discussions with the joint legislative committees of both House and the Senate, as well as Louisiana DOTD, and everybody checked off on every one of these particular elements. The tolling layouts, as you can see, no toll booths. We have mounted transponder readers and cameras at two facilities, one on either side, 2 gantries, one on either side of the bridge. And the intent is that the free flow of traffic at full speed will be maintained all the time. Next slide, please. I mentioned the primary evaluation was lowest tolls for the shortest amount of time. Bidders were provided, bidders who did provide the proposal had to include a toll rate schedule, which we have to live with for the selected amount of time up to a maximum of 30 years. It is also at the bidder's discretion to use multiple toll rates for different classes of vehicles and participants and so on and so forth, which we did. Our toll rate schedule, which is in the next slide, and I'll share it with you, was developed and finally negotiated with the DOTD, approved by the legislature, and was selected based on a 30-year toll rate in order to reduce the early on tolls as much as possible for the local residents. Everything is based on a 2019 toll rate in terms of the different charges, and the project agreement dictates a maximum toll rate that could be charged. Again, very similar to what we have in US 36. The percent change in the consumer index will be applied to the toll rates in the chart, except for the what we call the local auto or the automatic vehicle identification toll rate, which every year will be established based on the table and approved by the legislator and the DOTD. The project agreement also grants us the exclusive right to collect tolls from the Belle Chase Bridge to cover our expenses and repayment of upfront capital, as well as funding long-term operations maintenance of the program. Before we go to the toll rate schedule, I want to also mention very early on in the project development process, not only we, but others worked with Louisiana DOTD and their advisors and were able to secure 2 build grants that also subsidized the overall project costs. They weren't large, but there were enough. Again, because DOTD was able to approach US DOT, Build-A-Bear Bureau, and use the different programs that were available, alternative financing, private participation, and the use of some small amount of what they call non-federal share as an initial seed money. And all of these things added to the opportunity for them to be approved within the federal government. Next slide, please. I won't really bore you with each of the individual details, just wanting to highlight the very top left corner. The local autos, local residents, we're starting with 25 cents of tolls for each direction. And in year 30, large trucks would go across this bridge at $7.25. So you can see the range from 25 cents for cars today to 60 cents for cars, local cars in 30 years, $6.90 to $7.25 for large trucks that are non-local. Next slide, please. Some of the innovations, again, for you to think through, and the reason I emphasize the innovations quite simply is that, as my colleagues at United Bridge Partners will agree, engagement in the private sector at any stage of the procurement and delivery of an asset will help you bring innovations to market, bring innovations to the asset delivery and lifetime of an asset that you otherwise would not have the ability to achieve. That's not limited to design, it's not limited to P3s, but because in a P3 environment, the equity provider and the investor is on the hook for 30 years, and equity typically comes out last. It's a debt service that goes, it's rehab that goes, there's some return of capital during the life of the concession, but really the equity, the last tranche of equity that comes out of a deal really happens near or at handback. And if you have the right development partner with you who does not sell equity, we do not trade our equity in. Every one of the 50 plus assets I shared with you, we have not traded equity. Closed-end funds typically need to get out of equity, but certain developers do not trade their equity. So as you select your partner, those are the types of things you need to think through. And having the right partner will provide the innovations, not only for the initial design and construction, but also for long-term life of the asset. I believe this is the last slide I have, Kevin. Oh, again, the local community impacts, very similar to what we had talked about previously. We're more than happy to answer any questions and get much deeper into any of the topics you may want to discuss.
Thank you, C. We'll open it up for questions now from the Bi-State Working Group. And if I can just remind you, be sure and take your mute off because I think most of us are muted.
Yes, yeah, could you speak a little more about equity? When you say debt and equity, equity is ownership, right?
No, equity, when we set up the financing stack, as it's known in the industry, for a particular project, we would like to gear that project in such a way that 90%, close to 90% of the financing is brought through debt. Debt could be muni and publicly sourced debt. It could be privately placed debt. It could be short-term, long-term bonds. It could be a variety of different things. Equity participation is where the investor developer puts up their equity as opposed to getting 100% debt financing. We put in 10%, 15%, 20%, depending on the needs of the project and whether or not it's an availability payment versus a total revenue risk project. We put in equity the same way they put their money. And the way the stack works, the way the stack works, we pay off the debt first, our equity stays in the deal, and we get our equity back towards the end.
And John, the way I would describe it is the public always is going to own the bridge, but the investor is going to invest in the private activity associated with the public-private partnership. So they're putting their own investment into the capital cost and the other costs that are required to design, build, and for that, they will get a return back during the time period of the contract.
So they take a payment monthly or annually, just like the TIFIA loan payback.
It could be, that would be part of what they would call a finance plan that they would provide as part of their proposal. And it would outline, and you would actually be able to see exactly where they are proposing to invest their money and when they're proposing to get return on their money.
That just sounds like more debt to me, though, Lowell.
Well, it is debt. I mean, in essence, to advance capital cost, you're going to have to do debt financing.
Yeah.
So the issue is, and kind of the equity, they try to keep it down and do more debt. But what you're getting from the investor is their innovation and professional expertise in the project. So they're providing that expertise as part of their team. So, I'm happy to let SIA and United Bridge Partner give their view on that.
The other thing about participating with equity on behalf of an owner is on behalf of investors, skin in the game. So when we put in equity, we are committing our money to the deal, to the project, to the asset for the long term. So for example, in Bell Chase or in US 36 or in a PA 500 bridges, our equity stays in the deal for the length of the concession. And the only way for us to get our equity back is for us to meet the handback requirement that the owners have laid out and to have met the performance criteria for that particular asset over the life of the concession. Brian, I don't know if you guys do it differently, but that's typically how we do P3 equity.
That's part of what's providing you that long-term warranty, John.
Yes.
Is having that ownership interest in it with their own money. They have that skin in the game to provide that warranty. Otherwise, you're going to dock some of that skin in the game from them.
Yeah.
So you're going to cost them money.
But then the return on that equity, I would assume, would be higher than the TIFIA loan rate?
Well, why don't we ask them both, if you want to give a couple of your project examples, in your investment return, just take one of your case examples and maybe give us an idea of what kind of return you would be looking for.
Ryan, you want to go first?
The question is,
there you go.
How the returns differ between, different capital structures?
No, it's really your investment return. If you want to take one of your case examples, say maybe one of your recent one, Klein Avenue Bridge or the bridges up in Michigan, what kind of return in your finance plan were you looking for on your equity piece?
Yeah, so we don't share our proprietary returns. I will say that we tend to use a higher degree of equity, given that we take a little bit more risk than I would say a traditional concessionaire developer. And to Sia's point earlier, I think in terms of skin in the game, the benefit of equity for the public owner is that it incentivizes the developer or the concessionaire to maintain the structure in proper working order, make sure that people are continuing to use the structure, and that, because we don't get anything if people stop using the facility. So that's what we see as the benefit of equity.
And Sia, go ahead.
Sure. I can give you examples of what we call WACC, weighted average cost of capital. When we gear our deals, say 90-10, 80-20, debt is cheap. And by us going to TIFIA and maximizing TIFIA and PABs and so on and so forth, the cost of capital, or the cost of debt, I should say, depending on what time you get it and what you're looking at, I think today is what, 2%? It's almost free money.
It's even less than that right now.
Yeah. So when you think about that, and then you gear the equity, the 10% equity or 15% equity in the mix, the way that the average weighted cost of capital is probably between 150, maybe 200 basis points higher once you put in the equity. Now, typically,
and Sia, let me convert that. That's 1.5 to 2%.
Right?
So
1.5 to 2%. So typically, just across the industry, if you look across the return on infrastructure funds. By the way, we are not a fund. We are owned by CDPQ, which is the largest pension plan in Quebec, Canada. They own 90% of our stock. So we have access to very low cost of capital, even for our equity, because it's a long-term pension plan. But if you look across infrastructure funds in North America, and these are by all of our benchmark competitors, the McCrorys, the Transurbans, the Infrareds, Fengates, those people. When you look across that and all of the returns, because most of them are publicly traded and these are public funds, a typical return purely on equity has come down. Back in the days of when Lowell and I worked across the table on 595 of Port of Miami Tunnel, 15 plus years ago, the rate of return on equity was probably in the maybe mid to high teens pre-tax and say mid-teens post-tax. Today, it is not unusual to have an average return on pure equity post-tax in the 7 to 9%. And this is across a broad base. There are some funds that return significantly higher because of the mix of the assets they're invested in. And there are some funds that provide lower, but much longer term tenors and so on and so forth. So given where we are today, and I think your advisors, if Jen's still on, she would probably agree with this as well. The reason to do a P3 or not to do a P3 shouldn't be the cost of capital, because cost of capital is extremely competitive compared to debt financing. I think the biggest reason why you would want to do a P3 are the types of things we talked about: risk transfer, long-term commitment to operations and maintenance, ability to fund the project through tolls where you couldn't do it any other way, opportunity to take advantage of innovation, having this long-term warranty because of the handback requirements and performance schemes and things of that nature. Those are the reasons why you would do a P3, as opposed to, hey, the developer puts in 10% and they're going to get 10% or 12% pre-tax on their equity, where I can go to the muni market or I can get it all TIFIA at 2 to 3%. But again, when you aggregate all of the finance structure together, if you do 100% debt at 2%, 2.5% by including bonds and so on and so forth, and maybe some private placement, versus you put equity in at 10% equity, 15, 20% equity, you're talking 1 or 2 percentage points, which over the course of the 30 years, because you don't have any deferred maintenance issues, you got one neck to choke basically, and you have a partner that watches over that asset for you for 30, 40, 50 years. That difference goes away very quickly. And that's where the value for money conversation comes in.
So other questions?
It's good, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Other questions from the group?
I have one question. All of the models that were discussed involve your own tolling softwares, practices, and collection things. Do you guys have any projects where the tolling aspect of it, like for example, we have our own tolling software? Is that a big component of your packages, or is that a negotiable?
I can certainly take that. Both models are in existence. Our projects, the ones that we have, the owner has very specific requirements as to what the toll software ought to look like and what the performance of it ought to look like, and so on and so forth, because just the way they've got it laid out. But we are aware of, and we have worked with owner agencies, for example, Florida Turnpike Enterprise. If you do a P3, Florida Turnpike Enterprise will do the tolling and will participate in the tolling of that. So even though the developer puts in the toll equipment and puts in the, all the infrastructure, collection of the tolls, back office transactions of the tolls, and so on and so forth are being handled by the Florida Turnpike Enterprise. So it can be both. My personal recommendation would be that if you have a single asset and you have had the tolling operations, back office, and so on and so forth in place for a long time, it may not be a bad idea as a part of your project objectives to take a good hard look at the true value of what you have. When was the last time it was upgraded? What are the types of things you can benefit from in terms of new developments in the industry? What are the types of efficiencies that could be gained, and so on and so forth? And allow the private sector, either through your initial advisory or as a part of the proposal, come back to you with recommendations. And then you can sit there and compare apples to apples. If you like your system better and you don't think there is any opportunity to improve upon it, keep it and have your tolling and back office be a part of the PA that the private developer would have to absorb. Or if on the other hand, you sit there and say, I think I like what I'm hearing from the industry and from my advisors and so on and so forth. So maybe it's time for an upgrade. Then you can allow the private developer, the same way they demolish and get rid of the old bridge, they will be able to come in and help you with your toll infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sia just said. I would just add, at least on our projects, while we work with third parties on the tolling infrastructure and software, we manage the tolling back office in-house. The reason that's important to us is because we've built up a very efficient operation where we're very good with our back office, and that allows us to keep toll rates lower because we are so efficient with that, invoicing, billing, collections type activity. So at least on our projects, we prefer to manage the back office, but as Sia mentioned, there are flexible arrangements and different options for you as a public owner.
Other questions? A question, go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, Lowell. For all of you, excellent presentations. I'm very impressed. Each of you bring a different perspective and some really keen insights. One of the questions that the working group is thinking through, and would appreciate your perspective on, is if the decision was to test the market, test the private market, at what point would we be in a position to best obtain the most, I guess, advanced or articulate responses to, say, an RFI or some instrument like that? We're in the midst of, and I'd say 70% through a pretty complicated, lengthy environmental impact statement record decision process. It's a bi-state bridge, so there's statutory authorities that need to be clarified in both states, especially Washington. And that's going to take some time and effort and some legislative punch. And there's a variety of other complexities about ownership and such. At what point do you think, and I know you don't know a lot about this particular project, but generally speaking, when would you see your best ability to respond as a private entity, or Jen, in your case, when would you optimize the point of issuing some sort of RFI with the requisite information?
Right, and that could be an industry forum or market sounding just to gather that information. So, from the perspective of the local community, when would that timing be best useful to the industry and to the public owner?
Jen, would you like to address it first?
Sure. I think, my recommendation is engage early and often and at different levels. And I agree with Lowell that industry forum may be the way to start before you have an RFI. The benefit of this pandemic is that it is a lot cheaper and easier to get widespread participation in these sorts of forums, and to really find out before you undertake the RFI process of, what questions do folks have, really dive into what we know about the project and get that advice before you do the RFI. I think that's it's very feasible to do both at a very low cost under this environment. And I think it's very beneficial to get the sort of industry reaction before you come out with the RFI.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think the engagement early and engagement often is always a better approach. Discussion with as many stakeholders outside the project is also very beneficial. A project that I'm pretty sure most of my colleagues in the industry are aware of is the Presidio Parkway, where everything was said and done, but the Presidio Trust really was never party to any of those conversations. And after project was financially closed and about to be put into construction, Presidio Trust walked in and said, whoa, wait a minute, what are you doing? You got to talk to us. And that added significant cost, delays. Project is beautiful, it's done, it's completed, but it was one of those lessons learned that everybody talks about in a P3 environment. In your situation, quite frankly, the industry has been watching the project for a while, starting with the unsolicited proposal that was put in by United Bridge Partners, all the environmental activity that has been going on for the past couple of years since the unsolicited proposal was put in. And quite frankly, you have been fairly open with the industry press with respect to providing updates as to where the environmental documentation process is and so on and so forth. My sense is, given the current pipeline of P3s across North America, a project to this magnitude, this complexity, given the geographic location and so on and so forth, you will see significant interest at any time that you go to market. That's number one. You will have plenty of interest from folks willing to give you honest advice that would benefit themselves probably more than you. But that's why you have people like Lowell and Jen and others helping you from the advisory side of the house in order to be able to really boil down what is best interest for you with respect to an outreach to the industry.
I think you answered my second question there, which was, given the fact that this is a relatively small project, these are small communities, it's in the northwest part of the country, the traffic volumes are low compared to most of what you all look at. What level, just rough cut, what level of interest might there be in the private sector? And it sounds like you think there would be interest.
Belle Chase, the project I shared with you, $190 million. It used to be a 2-lane bridge and a 2-lane tunnel in the middle of a community of 25,000 people across the intercoastal waterway and a international canal. Initially at the industry forum, there were over, I want to say 70 or 80 different participants representing different entities. The intent to respond, or what they call LOI, in the state of Louisiana garnered over 18 different teams who responded. When the RFQ came out, because of some project agreement requirements, there were 4 SOQs submitted. Louisiana DOTD initially shortlisted 3. It was us, a team headed by Kiewit, and another team that had, equity, design build, designers, operators, and then ultimately we bid and won it. So, and that's in the suburbs of New Orleans, Louisiana. Don't sell yourself for the project short. This is a although it's not a super mega, and as Nick mentioned, it's not over $500 million, but it is in a very environmentally sensitive part of the country. It will garner attention from big bridge builders, marine environment participants. And I have to tell you, and I'm pretty sure my colleagues at United Bridge will agree with me, there is plenty of private capital ready to be deployed in these types of programs. And given where we are with the state of the economy, given where we are with the potential for the new infrastructure package, federal participation, grants, we're now hearing that there may actually be some opportunity for earmarks to come back at the federal level. And if you have the right partner, you can actually bypass the state and go directly to the federal for some specifically directed dollars for a particular project. And having the right partners and advisors will help you achieve that. My sense is you will get significant interest, and you should have a robust competition.
I guess the question would be timing. This is really, for all the panelists, but considering what Michael indicated, we're pretty comfortable there's going to be a need for some government level of funding to keep the tolls at a reasonable level, similar to what you had, Sia, in the Belle Chase example. Because it's very similar to that situation. You have people that live on one side that, work on the other. There's a lot of commuters on the bridge. So there's a desire to keep the tolls at a reasonable rate. So, understanding that as well as the ownership question, kind of when would the industry want to engage?
Well, on Belle Chase, the draft environmental document was released about the time the RFQs were released. LADOTD told the industry that they want to hear from them as a part of the SOQ and the RFP process. Ideas, one-on-one meetings, alternative technical concepts, a fair amount of those would be embedded into the final environmental document. So for example, one of the things we did, one of the ATCs we did on Belle Chase was a slide alignment change that required some additional right-of-way from a parcel that was commercial that wanted out anyway in order to do some other things with respect to timing and so on and so forth. So that ATC was approved. The additional right-of-way requirements and all the things you have to do to purchase a commercial property had to be added as an addendum to the environmental document. But the final RFP was issued about the time that the final environmental document was approved. So it is not all that atypical or untypical for an owner to start procurement when the draft document is past the initial comment period, understanding that the RFQ process and RFP process, by the time reviews, several months.
So at the time of the RFP, what level of engineering would you want to see?
Typically, in a hard bid design build, a hard bid P3, people talk about a 30% indicative, but the 30% indicative, quite frankly, in a situation like this, foundations, especially because they're marine foundations, those are critical. Alignment is critical. Impact to right-of-way is critical. Any other ESG type commitments are critical. Engineering in itself, as long as the footprint is clear, span arrangements are clear, the rest of that you should really leave up to the industry to come back with in terms of potential ATCs and so on and so forth. So the less engineering, the better, as long as the key risk elements are identified.
So Ken, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree that, and I think what the bi-state working group needs to understand is the heavy lift associated with moving down with a full-blown P3 procurement package. Takes a considerable amount of effort, not only to put together the package, and as Jan pointed out earlier, they're literally hundreds of pages long, as well as bringing on an engineer to advance the drawings to, say, a 15 or 30% completion level. Our approach is different. We tend to like less detail. One of the reasons is we take on more risk. We would prefer to allow our engineers and contractors to advance the drawings to a level from an innovation standpoint. So the projects that we talked about earlier, none of those projects had any engineering work done to begin with. So through our own due diligence process, we identify our approach and the level of detail from an engineering perspective where we can engage our contractor to work up what we call kind of a GMP that then helps us establish the tolling structure that we would propose from a financing perspective. So I suppose that's the big difference between how we approach a project versus the typical P3. Our suggestion is less is more, make it more performance-based than prescriptive-based, because there's going to be a heavy lift for you guys, not only from time, but resources and costs to put together a typical procurement package, engineering drawings, walk through RFQ, RFP process, that you just need to recognize if that's the path you want to go.
I agree.
So a question.
Lowell, I was just going to say, I agree with Ken. That model, call it Alliance, call it Progressive P3s, that model will allow the authority to procure a developer earlier. And unlike a hard bid P3, it will also allow the developer to select their designer and builder at a later date, depending on what stage of development the current project is in terms of environmental clearance. It provides significant more transparency to the owner with respect to the cost of the procurement of the design build services and so on and so forth. And it reduces the actual procurement timeframe. So, and we're doing our Dumbarton project like that. There are probably 2 or 3 other projects that we are involved with under that premise. And so I cannot disagree with what Ken says with respect to doing it through either a PDA or a progressive P3.
So in essence, the build grant that has been awarded, it's kind of a choice, it seems, and I'd like the panel to kind of provide their input on this. It's really a choice at this point to progress the design further, and then you would need to get additional funds to move forward with a P3, or you could use part of that fund to go ahead and procure a P3 based on qualifications and select the team now and then proceed with that team as a partner to progress the project. Those are not right or wrong answers. Those are options.
The other thing to keep in mind is if you were to do a progressive P3, your development partner will cash flow all of that work. So you don't have to come up with additional dollars. And that developer will recoup the cash flow for the development phase as a part of the long-term concession and the toll revenues and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I would just summarize with, from an acceleration standpoint, an innovation standpoint, and cost savings for the owner, going more with the progressive P3 route is beneficial for all three of those areas. So that's why we typically recommend that is the path you go down versus getting to a 15-30% design set.
So questions from the panel? Hang on. Questions from the working group?
Yeah, I have a question. So, Kevin, will you be making today's slideshow available to us today? Or
yes, yeah, absolutely. This will be archived on the Port of Hood River YouTube channel.
Okay, and will I be able to print off the slideshow?
I'll post all 4 of the PowerPoint presentations on the port's website. So yes.
Yeah, I think that at this point would be the most helpful thing for me, to be able to see actually what was in the slides and mark them with the red pen and all that.
Okay.
And think about all the different options.
So a question for the team is, if you do a progressive approach, how do you select your partners and when? In other words, your design build or your contractor designer, your operator, kind of when would you do that, and kind of give an example?
Excellent question, Bull. So from our experience is working collaboratively with the owner and helping them understand the procurement process. And like I said, my choice of word is performance versus prescriptive. Is end of the day, any concessionaire is going to have to design and construct a bridge with the DOT and AASHTO regulations. So nobody's ever going to, and that's a very important concept, is nobody's going to deviate from that. This is why one reason we like the preferred CMGC model, where end of the day, and I'm an engineer, but contractors really understand from a means and method sequencing approach. You want them at the table as early as possible from the innovation perspective, because they understand how they're going to approach it and build it. So going back to your question is when I would suggest you get away from that 200-page procurement document, and you can do it in something much less. And it's, like I said, it's more performance-based and best value on the technical expertise, on what the team's bringing you from the ability to finance, design, construct, operate, and maintain, and even the back offices. And it's more qualitative than quantitative because you don't have a price. And you can set up selection criteria that help you guide you through that process. And that's what we've done. We did that at Bay City. We've done, like I said, we did our own design build best value selection at HRE as well. So that would be our recommendation.
Yeah.
So go ahead, see you.
I was just going to say, I agree with Ken. We are developing an 18-mile corridor with a 2-mile bridge in South San Francisco Bay Area, which is a developer-led project that we actually brought to market. It's a transit project, but on that one, we procured the environmental consultant, we procured the initial design partner for us, and we are about, I want to say, a year away from procuring the design build for the bridge through competitive process. Everything's open book. The owner is participating, FTA is participating in all that conversation. Same thing with our LA Convention Center expansion, same scenario. We were able to work with the owner, City of Los Angeles, very early on developed what the performance criteria was going to be, not the design specs, the performance criteria of the expansion. And then we developed a very brief RFQ, went out to the marketplace, shortlisted, interviewed, and on a little bit of a cost, not a bid, but cost for overhead and cost for some design activities and things like that, more of a table scenario. We're able to pick up our design builder and are now working with them towards a GMP and a fixed schedule. Now, what's critical to understand is the model we advocate for. At the time we get to GMP and we get to the committed schedule, we novate those contracts into a quote unquote hard bid, fixed price, fixed schedule, design build contract with the design builder.
I want to just mention
Yeah,
that
go ahead, Jen.
kind of eyes open procurement really has benefits for both sides. Again, as somebody who's kind of a skeptic about these things, you know, the perception on the public side is, oh, you're bringing in the private sector, they're going to game it for themselves. You can create the process that looks at that and manages that risk along with all the other risks. The one aspect of this project, and forgive me because I'm coming into this fairly new, that might be worth exploring a little bit further down the pike as you bring in the private sector is whether you're considering policies like resident discounts for the folks who are commuting daily, something like what happens for the Staten Islanders who commute over the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, which now MTA is considering removing. Exploring that, if that's going to be an element of this project, or if it's something that any nature of that would be part of the project, I would recommend that's something that a policy question that really could be resolved or at least explored on the public side that will help the private side, because obviously that changes the elements in that long chart that Sia showed us, you know, what you want that to look like from a perspective of commercial traffic versus local traffic versus folks from Seattle like myself who would love to see the very scenic area that this bridge will be over.
So Nick, a question for you. I know you guys are just getting into considering the project development or progressive P3, whatever you want to call it, approach. You know, what are your thoughts related to that versus what you've been using as far as a firm bid proposal approach?
I think it could work for some projects. I don't think it could work for all. You know, for projects, I think like this, that you need to have a lot of stakeholder involvement in the beginning. I think it could work. Like for instance, our mountain corridor projects, if we ever did a P3 up to the ski areas, I think we would likely do it as a PDA P3 because of the need for a little bit more intimate involvement with stakeholders at the front end. I think you just need to make sure at the back end that when you do turn it out, when the developer turns it out for the bid out to a constructor, that you're making sure that you're getting a project that's
price.
Yep. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that, you know, when you build this process, you got to ensure that the team is going to manage that process very competitively. And in essence, they are procuring that team and you want to understand how they're doing it. Mm-hmm. So in an open competitive approach. So in you know, as Nick mentioned, Maryland is working on that now, and I'm one of the advisors on that project, and it is a different approach, but it does have that off-ramp that gives you the opportunity. You know, if for some reason you're working with a partner and it just isn't working, you're not at a 30-year contract at that point. You know, you can decide to, hey, we're going our separate ways, and you would have a provision in your agreement that would outline how that would get taken care of. So not suggesting that would be your goal, it's not. But by the same token, you want to ensure that that partner you bring on long-term is in fact going to be a good partner for the public owner.
Hey, Lowell, just a quick time check. We're 3:45. It's amazing how fast this time has gone. It's just been incredibly informative. So I don't know if there's any other issues that members of the Bi-State Working Group would like to bring up that maybe haven't been covered quite yet.
I have a question. So right now, the Port of Hood River is able to enter into a P3 agreement through the new state regulations that we have. And it sounds like from what people are saying is that we, get started sooner than later if we're going to go this route. And so the port can, on its own, go that direction. But we also have this bi-state working group that is working on this project and working on the possibility of becoming an official group between the two states through the legislatures. So how would your groups, Plenary Group or United Bridge Partners, be able to potentially, would you want to work with the port if we, of course, because they are the official entity at this point, could we transfer that to a different entity at some point if we become official between the two states, or how would you work with that situation?
Good question.
Yeah, so from our perspective, that's really up to you, whether you want to keep the port as the lead agency, or whether the lead agency is the official bi-state group. I would say in terms of pursuing traditional public financing, I could see how you would think that you might have a little bit more power and political sway as a bi-state working group versus the port itself. So that could be a benefit. But, in terms of a potential procurement, it really makes no difference to us whether the port is the lead agency or the bi-state group.
Just one thing to add to what Ryan says, and I totally agree with everything he mentioned. Working with multi-jurisdictional owner organizations is not unusual in a P3 environment. Most P3s are substantially large enough that would require an operating unit, a procurement unit, an owner unit, and even within the owners, you could have multiple stakeholders depending on how the project is funded, how the project will ultimately be financed, who the users are, and so on and so forth. So as Ryan mentioned, it doesn't make a difference to us. It goes back to your objectives in terms of how you want to administer the project and how you want to be at the table 30, 40, 50 years from now when you get the asset back.
Yeah, I think the question is a legal one, because you have an owner now that is the Port of Hood River. In the future, you could have a different owner, which could be a bi-state. We'll call it an interlocal agency in essence. But at the end of the day, the bridge itself would transfer over. I'm assuming that's what you're thinking. So it would transfer from the Port of Hood River over to this new authority. And, I've done a lot of those over the years. You just essentially transfer all the assets with it. And that contract would transfer from one entity to the other. So, and that's really a legal question. And I think it comes down to a policy question for the bi-state working group and the port as to one, when you want to start, two, the approach, and three, kind of timing wise within that. And I think what you're hearing from the industry is, you've got a lot of your environmental done and you've got your draft document out. So they're not that far away from being prepared to engage. So the issue is really a timing one now as to how you spend your build money and when you want to gather more market input from the industry. So
I just have one more question.
yes, ma'am.
Would Plenary Group or United Bridge Partners help us work with other to get other monies, TIFIA grants and or loans, TIFIA loans and things like that? I mean, you've worked with all these financing mechanisms, so you have people that work with your groups to help us with that. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
And what's interesting, and I don't know how United works, especially since they bring significantly more equity to the conversation than we do. One of the things we work with, especially in a PDA type project where we get on board much earlier in the process, we not only help identify funding sources, but we also assist in grant applications, doing the heavy lift to get a project into a particular program such that it can be eligible for additional funding and so on and so forth. That's not all that unusual.
So to piggyback off of what Mayor McBride said, before we were kind of, you know, I think all of us were sort of under the impression that it's kind of, we go this federal route or we go with a P3 route, but it sounds like what you guys are both saying is that the rules have changed and there's been more recognition that we could actually kind of pursue these avenues at the same time, and you guys could help us with both of those as well.
Yeah, I mentioned on the Belle Chase project, under the Build America Bureau, US DOT, Federal Highway Administration, there are different incentives offered to public sector owners who put up non-federal share monies towards a particular project, and that could be financed or cash flowed by a private partner. It could be done through your coffers, however you want to do that. But then based on that non-federal share, you can go after and apply for build grants and other grant monies. And then as far as TIFIA is concerned, you would be the lead agency applying for it, but your private development partner will do all the actual work in getting things in place and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with that. As somebody who used to work in the TIFIA office, you know, on the other side of that table, we welcomed folks that went, you know, so it wasn't like we were pro P3 necessarily, but from a federal perspective, giving grant funds to a P3 makes sense, because if we're doing it in a traditional 80%, 20%, for us to provide financial assistance, it was 10 cents on the dollar at most to give a TIFIA loan or other things. And so any grant funding we provided was much less than our commitment would have been under a conventional project. So it definitely is possible and welcomed to do P3 in conjunction with federal funds.
I had a question for Nick. Is the concession agreement for US 36 a public document?
Yes. I'll just find it right now and I'll just post in the chat box.
I'd appreciate that. Yeah, it's really interesting when you mentioned all the nuance you could put into structuring a deal for your, you know, specific environment.
Yeah, it took us, 2 years to negotiate it, but not 2 years, probably about, we closed in 2014 and we started the process. We reached commercial close in 2013 and we closed in early 2014. And it took about a year and a half, with all the one-on-ones and back and forth with the other shortlisted bidders.
Yeah, that's significant work.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah, thank you.
Being from Colorado, I know that road very, very well. So good job.
Thank you. It looks like you're in Scottsdale. Are you in Scottsdale? I think I recognize that neighborhood.
No, I'm in Palm Desert.
Okay. Looks like my in-laws snowbird neighborhood.
Yep. The amazing virtual world we live in today.
Well, Lowell, we're right on the cusp of 4 o'clock. This has really been a good discussion. Lowell, do you have any closing thoughts to kind of wrap up the discussion this afternoon?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the panelists for your time, and you know, Jen and Ken and Ryan and Nick and Sia, very good information, and thank you for the input and being available today. We very much appreciate it. And as you can tell, the working group has got a lot on their mind and thinking through this. And as Nick and Jen can tell you, as a public owner, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose at times. It comes at you fast and furious. So we'll do our best to try to digest it and make it into smaller bite-sized chunks for decision making. And Kevin, thank you for pulling it all together.
Thank you, Lowell. And I'll go ahead and we'll be doing minutes or brief transcription of this meeting. Try to keep it within less than 10 pages. But all of the PowerPoint presentations and the link that Nick just forwarded, we'll put a spot on our website as a holding spot for all of this information. And we'll certainly be reaching out and saying our thanks to all of you. The port will be sending a small token of our appreciation. It'll certainly meet the thresholds for your public gift limitations for those on the public side. So everyone, thank you very much. Members of the working group and elected officials, thank you very much, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.